How's everybody doing today? I'm Jen. I am Wine Antics. I am an advanced wine taster, as I like to say. I've taken a couple certified certifications. I am a wine lover, and I'm here today to talk to you about wine judging, wine globetrotting, and what is Kaizen in Champagne, France. I have a special guest, not only Stub, as you know, my co-host from corkenvy.com, but Mr. James Melendez, who is going to share with us all these lovely things.
Hi there. James Melendez. So thank you so much for having me today, Stub and Jen. I really appreciate it. Really, and talk a little bit about obviously the globetrotting, but also about this great wine experience called Kaizen in terms of what it means in terms of historical perspective for Champagne.
Thank you, James. And I really look forward to getting a little bit of an education because even though I'm a wine lover and I've taken certification classes, we're always learning. And that's the one thing we love about wine. Cannot forget the lovable, the huggable, the wine otter that is my co-host, Stub from Cork Envy.
Well, I'm going to have to add wine otter to all of my bios now, I feel like. Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I'm really excited to have James on the show. I'll get to talk about a little bit how I met James. Since we are going to talk champagne, I'm opening a bottle of my favorite champagne, J, with which my house is not complete unless there's 3 to 6 bottles around, and I've opened it perfectly.
Perfect. So James, you have a couple titles behind you, as I found out trolling you on social media, because that does happen when we have guests. We like to go around and see what they're doing on social media. You have James the wine guy, and you have James the travel guy. What does that mean to you? Where has that brought you? It sounds like fabulous titles, James.
Sure. I think when you think of wine, you have to think of travel. They're mutually exclusive. And I think we live in a very interesting time, which is a lot of people are like drink local and eat local. And that's great. But without, traveling, without, really importing product like this, you wouldn't have champagne. This is Emile Leclerc, which is a fantastic replicant manipulant wine. And I think, they definitely go hand in hand. So when I go to Italy, I'm tasting, amazing Barolo or maybe Negro Amaro or Aglianico. And so when you're there, you're really tasting the land and, being part of that experience. And I think you can only put foot on ground and get that experience by being there. As much as I love Aglianico, I can only get so much of it here in my beautiful town of San Francisco.
Yeah, that's a good point, that you can or can't get things in certain places and you drink what's available and what you like. I love the drink local. You mentioned that. I do love that. And I've shied away from that a bit myself because I want to expand my palate as well. So that is a fine point there, James.
I think for me, what I want is authenticity. So when I'm tasting champagne, I'm tasting something that can't be done in California. I love California sparkling. Mm-hmm. I love English sparkling, by the way, which is fantastic. But guess what? The price points are really high on English sparkling wine. In some ways, I'm like, okay, I'm going to switch over and go to champagne. And I read this article in the Wine or Business Drinks Business Daily, and it talked about that Prosecco region is going to be number 1 by 2020.
Really?
Producing like 440 million bottles of wine per year, which is crazy. That's really outpacing champagne at 315 million bottles per year. And so when you look at these trajectories, they're really interesting. It comes down to story, and it comes down to this really great product that really, I think at 420 million bottles, you're going to have a different product altogether and maybe a little bit adulterated in some ways. I also think you don't get, just to further answer this question or this thought, is I think Prosecco has been really good at marketing itself. Not that Champagne Bureau is not. They're doing a fantastic job. You have the NMs out there and they go some manipulants out there, selling their wines. And I think they do a great job, but they're really competing against a price point, especially the American consumer. We're pretty cheap, actually.
Yes.
And so when you look at the price points, let's say it's about $20 price point versus an average price point of a champagne, about $35. People are going to say, wait a minute, for 2 bottles or, double that price point, I get 2 bottles for 1 of champagne.
Is, like many other wines, is champagne cheaper when you're in the region, or is it taken as such a luxury even there?
No, actually, to answer that question really simply, it's actually much cheaper than it is here. And think about it. They don't have the 3-tier system that we have here. They have, it's coming to source right there. The transportation to get the wines to the marketplace are, in their backyard.
I was gonna say, like, you just solidified my desire to leave here and move to France. To know that champagne can be treated, it's not water per se, but I mean, like, just being able to go into a table, and I remember this about Italy and about southern France, just going there and having the most fabulous things brought to you at the table at very cheap prices. Like, to be able to have bubbly all of the time would be fabulous.
Yeah, it's wonderful.
So,
and I just love, first of all, I think it too, like all the producers that you get there, you never get here.
yeah.
So look at the 11,000 growers that are in Champagne, and let's say 8,000 of them are producing wines. You never get those 8,000. You get maybe 100 in the United States. So, when you look at that perspective, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. I'm getting, this fulcrum of possibilities that you can't get anywhere else. And I also think too, it's like, there's an American guilt, and that's, think about prohibition. People are like, I have a glass of sparkling wine once, twice, 3 times a week. And in the United States, it's like, you only have it 3 times a year, and that's it. Even today, here's 2017. It's absolutely insane that we have this kind of mindset.
I'm going to go out on a limb, and I'm going to probably give some knowledge that most people don't know. I have no shame about opening champagne or drinking alcohol.
Really?
Nobody would know that.
Yeah, I know.
Not at all.
Hard to believe from sometime my 10:30 a.m. post when I'm deciding I'm tasting all day. So there we go.
There's one topic that we're kind of interested in as being part of the industry, but not always seeing the behind the scenes. You've done some wine judging in the past, and I would love if you gave us some perspective. I mean, I know a little bit about it. I've worked the back of the house doing wine judging, but give us a sense of your experience and what it's like behind the scenes.
I think it's a privilege and it's an honor to do it. I've been called to go last year in Apulia in Bari, Italy. It was fantastic. And not only do you taste a lot of the wines, in the wine judging, I tasted about 600 different wines. And it was really exciting because I love Negro Amaro. And to really find, these really small independent producers tasting the rosé of Negro Amaro or even a white Negro Amaro. I mean, who knew that this existed? And so there's things you're going to be tasting at any wine judging competition. And for me to really get that experience, mouth to glass was just really fantastic. Doing that in the United States is exciting, but when you do it in Spain or Italy or France, Germany or Austria, it's really just that, great experience and a lot of people, because say last year when I was in Italy, they were saying, oh, so you only like the Primitivo. And I said, why do you say that? And they said, well, because Zinfandel is popular in California. And I said, no, that's kind of crazy. Yes, I love and appreciate Primitivo. It is fantastic. But at day's end, I'm really there to try the Fiano. I'm there to try the sparkling wines. I'm there to try everything, maybe except Primitivo, which is, not that I don't like it. I want to try something that I don't have experience in. And, part of it's getting to typicity. That is, okay, I'm supposed to taste Fiano and get to the typicity. What is typical? And, you have to really put yourself out of the equation to put yourself back in terms of wine judging. And that is, am I tasting fairly? Am I giving the right points? And I think I would say it's exquisitely difficult, not because it's technically hard, but you want to be fair, but you also don't want to be a pushover either, right? Look at the American over there who just judges everything at 95 points. So part of that is just really getting to that point of confidence and, really speaking your mind. And also you're going to face a lot of technical problems. And I think you're amongst a set of group of people who are, I would say, even, competitive against each other in terms of who knows better what a wine should taste like.
All right, I love those tips, James. I love talking about that. Can we rein it in just a little? You said you tasted 650 wines. Over how long a period was that?
That was over 3 days.
Okay.
And that's actually quite a bit. I mean, I've done, much fewer in, say, that same period of time. So maybe it might be typical where you taste 200 wines. But to taste that 650 number, it was a race, actually. And, I would also reference back to my experience of being a food and wine marketing manager at a very large retail chain here in the United States of 300 stores. I had to go to coffee cuppings. And, tasting 60 cups of coffee at one time is actually much more difficult than any wine tasting you would ever do or wine judging.
Now, why do you say that? We can talk about coffee or wine either way, but you're tasting through that many things. A lot of people wonder, how do you taste 200 plus wines a day? And by the end of the day, you're not inebriated on it. We know there's some tips there. So explain maybe a little bit about that from your judging experience, and also how do you keep your palate fresh to where you're judging the last wine of the day as fairly as you were the first wine of the day?
Again, you really bring yourself back to base, which is, you have to eat, you have to spit, you have to drink a lot of water, and cleanse your mouth out as much as you can. And I think, I would say, are you perfect from obviously the morning time is really when you want to be drinking wines, between say 8 and 10 a.m. A little bit after that, fatigue sets in a bit. But I think it's really keeping that perspective back in place. And I actually don't think it's rocket science either. So if I'm tasting through 50 wines from 1 to 4 or 1 to 3, whatever it might be, I'm more like, okay, this is great. I love this. And I don't think I'm really missing everything. I'm capturing a lot, but I'm not missing things.
So I would love to hear a little comparison from you, James, between what it is to be a judge in the U.S. and a judge international when it comes to wine.
I would say that, living here in the United States, and I don't think it depends where you are in the United States, you're having a lot more access to California wines or Oregon wines or Virginia wines or whatever it might be. I think it's just a new perspective when you're putting, mouth to glass in France or Spain or wherever you might be, Portugal. And I think it's just really getting to that framework. And I also think a lot of people are skeptical about the American palate. That is, you're from, the U.S. and your palate has only so much experience. And that's true. I'm not going to deny that. But I also say that it's not going to be such a difficult proposition to be tasting import wines. We're tasting wines from place. And I think that, I challenge myself. I say wine racetrack that is on my videos. You really need to be tasting wines from all places, all regions, and all varieties at all times. And I want to be tasting Turkish wines and wines from Cyprus and Georgia and Australia and Uruguay and so forth. And so I go out there and I seek those wines. And I think that's really part of that education. You have to continually taste.
Do they do blind tastings just as regularly as we do? Or is there a different style of judging internationally?
I would say it's really very much a blind tasting proposition, and you're tasting through almost everything blind. And it would be great to have some data points, right? But ultimately, you don't have anything to go by. You might have region. This is Campania. This is from Sicilia. This is from certain regions in southern Italy, and that's all you get. And that's okay. I would even like an alcohol point. I would like to know where we are with something. And so my experience has been that you don't even get those data points. So it's completely blind. And I do respect that. What was really hard was, okay, I took my notes and I'm like, well, I'm trying to compare all these wines, 600 plus wines. And, what did I like? And how do I get back to what I was tasting and really recognize that bottle to, the comments I made in my wine judgment. So it was really hard to get there. And that's what I find to be very common in European tastings as opposed to the US. You know exactly what you've tasted and what you've rated. And I think it's because you get fewer wines and they just pair them together a little more tightly.
I like, though, you were talking about typicity earlier when you're judging and you want to get to what's typical of this varietal or this region that I'm tasting when you're judging. Do you find that more difficult in a sense? And you talked just a minute ago about trying as many wines as you can and experiencing as much as you can. Do you find that a little difficult? Because even some of the imports we get from Europe, they're still wines made for the American market. So if we taste Rhone blends here, maybe they're not the exact same Rhone blends we're going to get if we go to the Rhone and taste there. Have you found a problem with that in kind of, converging on what a wine should or shouldn't be when you're judging?
So what I try to do is do some education when I'm there. So I try to arrive a few days early and I'm just tasting through as many bottles as I can put my hands on so I can get a little bit of that typicity gauge in a way. And I think once you get that, you really get, I think, a better feel for the wines. For example, I had White Negro Amaro, which I only know 2 producers in Puglia that do that. And I'm like, what is typical? I have no idea. So what you had to do is you had to taste through a whole library of these. And I'm like, okay, well, I've tasted, 10 vintages. And I think I know what this is supposed to characterize at. I know it as a red wine, but as a white wine, completely different. And it was fascinating. And so it's really getting to Vino Veritas. What is the truth of the wine? And that's a fun part of it as well.
Any other questions for James here?
Oh my goodness! Of course I do. Of course I do. I want to know where he's going next year. I want to know all about this Kaizen specifically and what it means in terms of the word root that is improvement, right?
Yes.
It translates to improvement. So what does that have to do with Champagne and the Champagne region?
Sure. In addition to loving, champagne and wine and all this, I love business and I love complexity. And so for me to love business and complexity is to think about how do you reduce complexity. You can never get to simple, you get to less complex. And when I look at things like Kaizen, and I learned this early on in college, which was, how really the transliterated word means change for better. And so it really comes from Edward Deming, who went to Japan. He's a statistician. He goes through and does a census, but he really becomes this genius in terms of turning around the, 50, or actually longer than that, 75 years ago, you would not want to have had a product from Japan. It was so bad. So the quality wasn't there. So Kaizen was doing incremental improvements. And in my belief, and I've done things in terms of biopharma, working at a large firm where we did Kaizen, we did Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, business process improvement, and so forth, 5S. And so, and all these things add up to one thing, which is when I look at incremental improvement, that's a very different proposition than innovation. So we in the United States use the word innovation like it is just, everything is an innovation. Here I live in north of Silicon Valley, everything is an innovation. But that's simply not true. And when I look at Champagne is a great testament that it just wasn't Dom Perignon, Madame Clicquot, or 10 other well-known characters in the Champagne region. It was thousands of people that made this bottle possible. And I think that's really a really cool testament. When I think of this, you had to have things like the Champagne Association, which is called the Champagne Bureau, to come alive. What they do right now is they've actually, since I was just in Champagne, they were really talking about making the bottles lighter. So you need 3 atmospheres of pressure to hold in this bottle so it doesn't explode, as it did 300 years ago at a 50% rate. You had to really, increase that capability of that bottle. And I think when you looked at Perignon, you looked at, let's blend wines. Let's look at the viticulture. And, I look at the commitment of the wine grape growers of the region, which are over 11,000. And they're committed to basically the triad, which is the Pinot Noir, the Pinot Meunier, and the Chardonnay. But there's also the other grapes, too. So I met Drapier, Champagne Drapier, and they do things like Arbonne, which is allowed. In Champagne, it's 0.3% of the production. They do Petit Meslier, Pinot Blanc, and Pinot Gris. And those are the really cool stories of how this, how did it come about that these 6 grapes were selected to be the wine grapes of the region?
And if I could interrupt you, I'd like you to repeat the primary 3 grapes that are in there, because I think there's such a stigma with one of those grapes that it's kind of sneaky, and I want people to recognize that grape.
The Chardonnay?
Yeah.
Yeah. Chardonnay really has taken a beating over the years, right? And it's unfair, and it's really, if you like Chablis, you should really love Champagne. But there's been good reasons, right? You go to the palate of your Costco, and what do you have? You have that oaky, buttery stuff. And that's really sensitized the palate for the American consumer, which is thinking it's a bunch of crap. And in reality, it really isn't. Some of the best wines, in my opinion, are the Brut Nature, Blanc de Blanc, the vintage wines. Amazing. But, I think it's just really an amazing, culmination of thinking of the historical perspective of Kaizen. And that's actually a modern, I would say, relatively modern concept. You can look back at Venetian shipbuilders and really bring that forward and say, well, we've actually been doing Kaizens for a long time. We just haven't called it that. Yeah. But this region has all the reasons for being a non-success. And yet, instead of being a wine region of passable wines, it's wines of excellence.
And I don't mean to steal the limelight, but I from Stub, because I haven't let him talk at all yet. But I'm really interested in how you will take this article that you've written and move it on to what we talked about earlier, the English sparkling wine. Talk about improvement. Talk about making something out of nothing and developing over time and using climate change to their advantage. Do you see kind of expanding that article and talking about maybe English sparkling wine as well?
Absolutely. And I think it's really interesting because let me tell you this. So when I was in Champagne, I was in the Champagne Bureau, and they're talking about climate change. That was one of our top questions. And they're saying, guess what? Even today, even with global warming, we're still having unpredictable years. We might get 3 vintages out of a decade, if that. We have to use reserve wines. This is our region. But I think if I expand that out, I would look at Kaizen in terms of English sparkling wine production. And it's a very interesting story there. The French love, their champagne. They love their sparkling wine. The English are very particular, and they're like, oh, it's not French. It's not good. And they've really got to come to terms with loving their wines and loving what they're doing. I think they're doing a phenomenal job. They've come a long way in say 40 years, and that might be a Kaizen into itself, that it's like record time, right? But it's coming into modernity. And in modernity, I think things happen much more rapidly.
Can we take it back just a little bit, James? And I'm going to have you explain this for those viewers who don't understand. You were talking about only getting maybe like 3 vintages in a decade and using reserve wines to make wine. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So basically, the whole ethos, if you will, of Champagne is to really produce blended wines. And so this wine right here probably has, and your wine that you have right there has probably 60 different wines that make the composition of that wine.
Yeah, conservatively,
so,
yes.
Yeah, you have, some people use the term multi-vintage or non-vintage. I actually prefer the term non-vintage because when you use the term multi-vintage, I'm like, oh, so you're talking about the 2010, 2006, and the 2002 that are blended together to create a multi-vintage, as opposed to non-vintage, which can be anything. You're pulling those reserve wines from any given year. And I think the Champenois have been just remarkable at what they're doing, and how you create consistency over time. That's, it's an art form. It's something you actually have to see in person and visit the caves to see what are they doing. This is just a complex product. And when I think of Champagne, I would think this is the wine that nobody would actually want to make because it is complex. It's difficult to make. It's not easy. And but they did, given really bad climate patterns, they made good from bad.
You're taking an agricultural product year over year and making it consistent in the bottle once you have the finished product. And I think that's amazing.
What I also find remarkable about Champagne, if I could just expand out, is, when you look at Champagne, you look at a region that has, been producing wines of excellence over time in terms of doing so with a lot of restrictions, right? There's only certain times you can pick. There's only a certain amount of acres or hectares you can actually produce. There's only certain ways of producing your wines. It has to be weighed. It has to be inspected. It has to be doing all these things. And in the United States, we really don't have that tradition. And ultimately, you end up producing fantastic vintage wines, and you produce amazing cuvées that, in spite of all that restriction, I think produce remarkable wines. And it's through the Kaizen, this concept, to really pull things forward in a way that I don't think the Champenois have really been appreciating their own history and culture. They do appreciate it, but I think ultimately it takes maybe somebody from the outside to come in and say, my God, this is remarkable. This is amazing.
I feel like I've learned so much, not only through talking to you, but thinking about a wine region in something a little bit beyond the superficial, and talking about weather and talking about vintage to vintage, but taking it in a longer term perspective. So I really appreciate that. I love the photos you brought to the show as well. I mean, it's so great to see when you're a lifestyle and travel and wine writer that you also take such amazing photos to share. It's not just with the camera, but it's really getting a grasp of the area through some great photos. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Absolutely. And so a travel tip, go to Champagne during the harvest season in September. You can look up a website for the city of Reims. And when you do so, there's a La Rêve, which is this really great light show on the cathedral with music. And when you're there, this can only happen in France. It is amazing. And then you could do all these amazing tours along the way. And the food is just stellar. It gets better every single time I get there. There's a restaurant called Racine right near the cathedral. And it's Asian-inspired Japanese French cuisine that is fantastic.
Wow.
And if you want to make yourself jealous of another human being, follow James on his social media when he's doing a trip, because it's amazing. He did some amazing things. You were gone for quite a while last year, I believe, right?
Yeah, I was gone for about 2.5 months, and so part of that was, part of it was wine, right? I was in Italy. I was in, about 12 different countries, and part of it was taking time out. So I had 6 weeks out that I just said I'm going to take. I'm going to be in Poland, Hungary. I was in Czech Republic, Austria, Netherlands, and so forth. And part of it's just really taking that time to, yes, I want to be really connected in the wine world. And by the way, I was in the Czech Republic, and they do some really great, fantastic Zweiggelts. And Pinot Noir was really surprised. I thought that was really nice. And in Poland, the Pinot Noirs were really very, very light in orientation, but really interesting.
Wow, it seems like you have such a breadth of knowledge, and are you sharing them in your videos? Because you have quite an extensive video collection on YouTube. Is that where you're sharing some of them, or primarily on your blog?
I do both. So I did, I have over 2,000, crazy man. I have 2,300 videos, which is a bit much. I've slowed down just a bit because I'm trying to do that plus earn a living. People think I don't, they think this is my job. It is not. I have to work hard in the day hours. But also I do share a lot of writing. So I did one on the 7 bridges of Königsberg, which is really this, it goes back to complexity, which I really love about travel and how I made some mistakes in my travel. I really want to save, people some of the heartache I had to do. I'm like, this is crazy. I don't want anybody to do what I did. This is just insane. Instead, I want to save people some time and some heartache, but also enjoy their experience. And lastly, my favorite place, my new favorite place was Berlin, Germany. I had an amazing experience there. It's a gritty city. It's one of the poorest major cities in Germany, but the cuisine was amazing. It's a little bit rough on the edges, but it's just so cool and amazing to see.
Please tell us what's going on with you in 2017 and throw out any final thoughts for everybody.
Yeah, so I'm going to be traveling in Sicily, so I'm really excited because I've been to almost every major region in Italy, so it's my first time to Sicilia, and so I'll be the western portion, eastern portion, and spending a good solid 12 days there, so I'm really, really happy about that. Because my goal is to live in Italy or France, and io parlo italiano un poco. So to really get, that experience is so important for me. I do have a lot of domestic travel, and I definitely want to head out to Scandinavia at some point. And so that is yet to be planned. That's fall time. Maybe it's Iceland, maybe it's Finland, or Denmark is really top of mind. So that's what I'll be doing. And it's very interesting because all these things just pop into my travel schedule. So it'll probably happen later on, but I'll document that on Instagram. So I love to post photos there, but I also love to write about it as well. And I do videos about my travels as well, or at least the wines that I tasted from the regions. So one thing I would say is, if you're tasting wines, if you are traveling, go beyond your comfort zone and being out there tasting wines. And I was in areas where I'm like, oh my God, I'm in the scary area of Budapest. This is really, I took a picture. I'm like, this could be the last picture of me. Because I ended up in an unsavory neighborhood, which was unfortunate. Not that it's dangerous in all parts of Budapest, but this particular area was. But part of it is don't live your life in fear and, live with absolute, conviction and courage and love for life, and find people who do the same and surround yourself with those people. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Jenn and Stub and Jonathan and everybody watching. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, we're so glad you didn't die in any seemingly bad alley in Budapest, but what a story to tell. Back in Budapest, this happened to me. So Stub, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, final thoughts. Number one, I really want to thank James for being on the show. Little anecdote I didn't share. James was one of the first person I met when I started wine blogging before I was even really, in the business tangentially as I am now. And I remember meeting him at a conference and being very nervous to go up and introduce myself to him. And from the moment I met him, he's been gracious and helpful, and obviously is just a wealth of knowledge on wines, wine regions, and he's one of the nicest guys you're ever going to meet. So I really, really appreciate James being here. Other than that, I want to give apologies to Andre Robinson for running out of time, and maybe we'll get you on next week. And yeah, that's all I have for this week, Jenn.
Perfect. And I also want to echo Stub's sentiment. I thank you so much, James. I've only had limited interaction with you, meeting just the first time back in August, but every time I do, it's more quality, and you continue to be a very knowledgeable and very nice person. Like, I don't know how other sentimental ways I can be, but very nice, and I appreciate you. Other than that, stay tuned, and I will put the after party link here in Facebook, so please join us there. Hopefully James will stay for the after party a little bit, enjoy the rest of his second or first glass of champagne. I don't know where it's at, but I see he's nodding his head, so look out for the link, and we'll catch you later.